Good morning. So we're going to do something a little bit different today. In fact, well, different and same. So we're out at Battery Point like we've been 1.5 million times. So that's not the new part. But one of the questions I get asked semi-frequently when people see my photography is, oh, what camera do you have? Or the other one is, I want to get a quote-unquote real camera. What camera should I get? So I thought it'd be a good idea to do some gear reviews, particularly of the cameras I have. I'm not like going to go out and rent or purchase a couple $1,000 camera for this. So I figured I'd start out where I started out, which is with this Canon Rebel T6. It's not even the T6i, which is a slightly better model of camera. And in fact, when I got it, it was already, I think, about one model year out of date. So it's not the most cutting edge camera, but it's a good starter camera. And it is, in fact, a DSLR. But let's get a little further along before we go into too much detail. The T6 comes with a pretty mediocre 18-55 as its kit lens. It's plasticky. It's not really, I don't want to say it's not worth buying, because if you need an initial lens, it's a great initial lens, but it's not particularly bright. But this isn't a particularly good camera. This is the type of camera that you want to take outdoors when it's bright out, like today. You've got a nice clear sky. It is not something you want to do night photography with, or any other sorts of, I guess, more low light photography. But it is a good starter camera. It's a good step up from just having a smartphone, particularly if you want to learn the craft of photography. If you don't really care about how a photo gets made, if you're not looking for better results than you would find on a phone because of certain optical effects and the way your phone is processing multiple photos and doing everything, then you really shouldn't be looking into getting what most people would call a quote-unquote real camera. I think this has like 12 or 18 megapixels. This is not like a technical review. This is just me shooting the shit, basically. But this camera is capable of taking okay photos. It will teach you about how to use the camera controls. I would recommend that if you get something like this, you put it in manual mode and you shoot in manual mode for a pretty long time. And we're out here, it's almost noon, so we have a lot of light. We have essentially ideal conditions for using it. Another nice thing about this particular camera is it's essentially extremely simple, right? There's not a lot of, well, there are a lot of settings that you can go into, but there's not a lot that you really care about. This is a good camera to learn what aperture does, what, how to use an interchangeable lens, maybe pick up a second lens. It's an old camera. It's not going to be the greatest, but you can pick one of these up used for, well, basically dirt cheap at this point. So if you want to get into learning photography, this is a good vector to do it. When I got this, it was a little bit more expensive because I was buying it when it was only one model year old, and I bought it new. You can get these used really cheap. They use a single SD card. So yeah, it's a good starter camera. So one of the caveats about this camera is it's an old DSLR, which doesn't sound like that bad of a thing. DSLRs are still pretty reliable cameras, even to this day, even if you get them used. And some people will even tell you that they are going to be much better, hardier, and last longer than most mirrorless cameras today. The problem with particularly Canon and other brands as well is that they are phasing out, or have phased out, a lot of their DSLR lenses and lens lines, which means if you want another lens for a camera like this, which if you're going to learn photography, you've bought an interchangeable lens camera, it'd be good to have a lens to interchange. But you've got a very limited selection. You've got to rely on what's available, and depending on what you want to shoot, that's going to, your lens is probably going to end up costing more than the camera body. So my recommendation, if you're looking to pick up a lens, is to, instead of picking up some super expensive lens that looks really cool and has all these features and has a really low f-stop number, my recommendation instead would be to pick up a lens, not one of the multi-$1,000 lenses, but in fact to pick up this lens. So a 50mm 1.8. Now, basically every camera manufacturer that makes lenses makes a 50mm 1.8. As you can see, it's a really small lens, even with the lens hood on. And the reason that they all make it is that, well, it's a really simple lens to make, and it's a very nice, sharp lens. And it's usually, it is still used in professional settings, but typically speaking, this kind of 50mm is kind of the first step up into good quality lenses. It's going to be nice, it's going to be sharp. Is it the best lens in the world? No, but you can pick one of these up even when you could pick these up new, right? And this is actually one of the numerous revisions to this particular lens. A 51.8 is maybe going to run you $200 at the top end. So the body's relatively cheap, the lens is relatively cheap, but what this 50mm gives you the option of on this body is it gives you a lens that allows you to play a lot more with depth of field, with your f-stop, with your aperture, basically. And because it has that f1.8, it's going to be a little bit better in low light, so you can start taking photos in lower light situations. Now, the downside is it is what is known as a prime lens, and because it's a prime lens, it doesn't zoom. So the other one, we had 18 to 55 for our focal lengths. This one, it's 50mm. It's always going to be 50mm. It'll never be anything else. Another benefit to the 18 to 55 over this 50mm is the 18 to 55 is a stabilized lens, which means it's going to take a little bit of your handshake out of your photos, so you're not going to get as much motion blur, so your photos are going to be a little bit more crisp. Now, a stabilizer is not perfect. It's not going to solve all your problems. And a faster shutter speed can also get rid of those camera shake artifacts. So because we have a lower f-stop, we can increase our shutter speed, we can decrease our ISO, so we will get cleaner, sharper pictures at the cost of not being able to zoom our lens. So in order to zoom, we can't do that on the lens, so we do what is known as extremely manual zooming, which is you actually walk towards the thing. Now, it's 50mm, it's not going to give you a lot of reach, it's not a zoom lens, it's not a telephoto lens, I should say. It's kind of middle of the road. And it's just a really good kind of all-around lens. When I am just going out shooting, I usually have a 50mm on my main camera, because often I don't need the range of like a 24 to 70. I don't need the telephotos of a 70 to 200 or a 100mm or an 85. I don't need the wides of a 24. A 50mm is going to serve me for most purposes. Now, if I know that I need further reach or something else like that, I'll use a different lens. But 50mm is a good middle of the road, and it's considered kind of the standard lens. If you're in the camera world for any amount of time, or are just looking into it, you're going to hear things like full frame, APS-C, 1-inch sensor, quarter-inch sensor, that kind of stuff. And what that means is just how big the actual physical sensor on your digital camera is. Now, most phones have a very small sensor, which limits them in terms of what they can optically produce. It limits how shallow the depth of field can be. So anytime you see like portrait mode in a smartphone, what that's actually doing is that's blurring after the fact rather than blurring in camera through the optical qualities of the lens. Now, in particular, the T6 here is what is known as an APS-C camera. Now, depending on manufacturer, there is a little bit of variance in crop factor. For the T6, because it is Canon, the APS-C is actually a 1.6 times crop, which means that, for example, with this 50mm here, you're not actually shooting at 50mm. You're shooting at 1.6 times 50mm is your equivalent focal length. So in this case, the 50 turns into actually an 80mm, roughly. So you're not getting the exact focal length that it might be saying on the lens because that is designed for a full frame camera. And full frame cameras are very expensive. I would not recommend, personally, ever buying a full frame camera as your first real camera because, well, it's going to have a lot of assistive tools in it. It's going to have a lot of good features. I'm not saying they're bad cameras. They're very good cameras, typically. But if you're learning, it's probably good not to break your bank on your camera body before you know whether or not it's actually going to be worth it. Right? Every time I've upgraded my camera gear, it has essentially been because I have run into a limitation, I have run into some problem, I want some better piece of hardware because it solves a problem for me. And as you go on, those problems become more and more niche, right? You upgrade, maybe your next camera is a full frame. The reason being is that you want shallower depth of field, you want, wider focal lengths, all sorts of reasons to go from a base camera like the T6 to a full frame camera. And then, of course, after you have a full frame camera, then upgrade to an even more expensive full frame camera that's going to be even more niche, right? But until you have that need, there's no real reason to upgrade beyond that. So this is an APS-C. This is 1.6 times crop. Other sort of fun things. A lot of the cheaper DSLRs have these little dinky flashes. They're not great. You really want an external flash, but it's something that you can use to kind of get to know what a flash does in photography, which is nice, without having to buy additional hardware and set it up and sync it and do all that. So there's a lot of little limitations, and that's just because this is a cheaper camera. This is a camera that's meant for somebody who's just entering into the photographic space. It does technically shoot video, but I wouldn't shoot video on it, right? It's a pretty bad video camera. But it's fine for what it's designed for, which is a beginner camera. It has a lot of limitations, but you can still get good effect out of it. In fact, all of the photos I'm taking on this particular hike to Battery Point are going to be taken with the T6. None of them are going to be taken with my R5. Okay, so almost out at Battery Point, and just some, I guess, final thoughts about the T6 here. It's a fine camera. It is completely adequate for what it is intended, its intended audience and purposes. And if you're looking at buying a real camera, I would recommend something like the T6 or whatever brand you particularly prefer. But the key is that while it is a limiting camera, it is still going to expand your horizons beyond what a smartphone could give you, and so it'll allow you to learn the art of photography rather than just whatever your phone happens to produce. That being said, that does not mean that you can't produce good photos on a phone, or that you need a camera like this in order to take good photos. But I would argue that a better understanding of photography and more control over your photos is going to take even somebody who's making really great iPhone photography. It's going to take their photography to the next level, right? I am a proponent of the more you learn, the better you get. And so that's why I recommend, if you're interested in photography, not sticking with a smartphone and moving up to, I hesitate to call it a real camera, because smartphones have real cameras too, but as most people would say, real camera. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Congratulations, you've gotten through my first gear review. It's a rambling mess, I know, but you know, hopefully it's useful to at least someone out there. And I'll see you when I see you.